Paul McCartney has lived a life that feels almost mythical, shaped by music that reshaped the world, and by losses that reshaped the man behind the legend. At 81, he carries the weight of 8 decades filled with stadium lights, global adoration, and private heartbreak that few ever witnessed. Behind the brilliance of his melodies lies a human story of longing, tenderness, and the search for a love that could steady the whirlwind around him. Through the rise of the Beatles, through triumphs and bruising chapters that unfolded under relentless public scrutiny, the women who walked beside Paul shaped every turn in his journey. Early romances taught him vulnerability, fame taught him distance, and one extraordinary woman taught him what it meant to be truly seen. Linda Eastman stepped into Paul's life not as a fan, not as a symbol, but as the one person who understood the man hidden beneath the music. Now, as Paul reflects on his 80 years, he has confessed the truth that time only made clearer. Linda was the love who defined him, the partner who steadied his soul, and the loss that changed him forever. But how did one woman leave such an unshakable imprint on a life already touched by the entire world? Paul McCartney's earliest experiences with love began long before the world placed him on a pedestal, back when he was still a young Liverpool boy trying to understand his own heart. In those formative years, he found companionship in Roan, a quiet, steady presence who offered him comfort during long afternoons filled with dreams of music and escape. Their relationship was sincere and intense, the type of devotion only teenagers can give without hesitation. In 1960, Dot became pregnant, and for a brief moment Paul imagined a future that looked nothing like the superstardom that awaited him. But life shifted tragically when she suffered a miscarriage, ending plans neither of them had fully learned to articulate. The loss created a quiet fracture, the kind that lingers without being spoken aloud. And by the time the Beatles began rising, Paul and Dot slowly drifted apart. As fame moved swiftly into his life, the innocence of those early days faded. During the band's first American tour in 1964, the world watched 4 young men ignite a cultural storm. Paul was swept into it with equal parts excitement and confusion. In that whirlwind, he shared brief moments of affection with actress Peggy Lipton, a young woman also navigating the sharp edges of early fame. Their time together was short, more a flicker than a flame, but it revealed something Paul did not yet know how to name. Even amid global hysteria, he was searching for a connection that felt meaningful, grounding and honest, something untouched by the glare of cameras and the roar of crowds. That search took a new shape in 1963, when he met Jane Asher, the talented teenage actress sent to interview the Beatles. After a performance at the Royal Albert Hall, she was only 17, but she carried herself with a confidence and curiosity that intrigued Paul instantly. Their relationship began quietly and grew quickly, weaving itself into the rhythm of his life, far more deeply than anyone expected. As Paul spent more time in London, he found himself welcomed into the Asher family home, where the warmth of her parents and the richness of their artistic world offered him new horizons. He lived there for extended periods, absorbing ideas, conversations, and influences that expanded his creative imagination. Inside one of the rooms in that house, Paul wrote some of his most intimate early love songs. Pieces like And I Love Her and We Can Work It Out emerged from that environment of youthful passion, cultural discovery, and emotional vulnerability. Jane broadened Paul's understanding of art and literature, pushing him toward new forms of expression and challenging him to see the world beyond the familiar boundaries of Liverpool. Their bond felt sophisticated and hopeful, a union of 2 young talents imagining a shared future in the midst of a rapidly changing world. But as Beatlemania intensified, cracks began to form. Paul's life became a relentless blur of touring, recording, interviews, and endless public scrutiny. Jane's own acting career pulled her in new directions, leaving them separated for long stretches of time. By 1968, after 5 difficult years marked by pressure neither knew how to navigate, their relationship began to unravel. When Jane publicly confirmed their breakup, the world understood that something profound had ended. Paul would later refer to Jane as his first real love, acknowledging the depth of what they had shared and the ache that lingered long after their separation. Through these early loves, tender, painful, exhilarating, Paul's longing for stability slowly came into focus. Long before he met the woman who would anchor his life, he was already searching for a love that felt like home. There are moments in a life when the noise finally softens, when the world that once dazzled and devoured a young man begins to make room for something steadier, something honest. For Paul McCartney, that shift began in the most unassuming way, at a gathering meant to celebrate color, sound, and experimentation. It was 1967, the year Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band reshaped the musical landscape, and the night of its London launch was crowded with artists, photographers, and people drawn to the orbit of a band that seemed capable of bending culture itself. Amid the swirl of excitement, Paul noticed a young American photographer, Linda Eastman, who moved through the room with an ease that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding them. She wasn't dazzled by fame. She wasn't breathless in his presence. She was simply herself. And something inside Paul shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but deeply enough to be remembered. Their first meeting was brief. A brush of lives not yet ready to intertwine. But destiny often circles back with deliberate patience. In 1968, after Paul's relationship with Jane Asher had ended, he found himself in New York, wounded but searching, uncertain but open. It was there, far from London's scrutiny, that he saw Linda again. This time the moment unfolded differently. Gone were the crowds and the noise. In their place was a gentler atmosphere, a space where two people could actually see one another. Their reconnection wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was warm, simple, human. Two people drawn together without pretense or performance. What began as conversation grew into companionship. What began as companionship deepened into something steadier, something that made sense to both of them long before they dared to name it. And yet the world around Paul was not gentle. The Beatles were entering their most turbulent period, their internal fractures widening. Fame hovered like a storm cloud, unpredictable and relentless. Many doubted his new relationship. Some questioned how quickly he had moved on, while others wondered why a world-famous musician would choose a woman so uninterested. But Paul saw what they did not. Linda was not a distraction. She was an anchor. In March 1969, they decided to marry. It was a choice that surprised many, but for Paul it was a choice that felt like breathing, instinctive, necessary, grounding. The ceremony at Marylebone Register Office was modest, almost plain, but there was a purity in its simplicity. He was no longer chasing the adrenaline of youth or the bright illusions of constant motion. He was choosing steadiness, choosing warmth, choosing a woman who looked at him not as a Beatle, but as a man with flaws, hopes, fears, and longing. After the wedding, Linda's life transformed. She had been a respected photographer, capturing musicians and cultural icons with an intuitive eye. But now she stepped into a role she never sought yet embraced fully: creative partner. As Paul began to shape a new musical identity after the Beatles dissolved, she stood beside him, not as an accessory, but as an active collaborator. When he formed Wings, she joined the band, learning as she went, proving again and again that heart, courage, and effort mattered as much as formal training. Through all of it, Linda brought peace into Paul's turbulent world. She offered a kind of quiet he had never known, a grounding presence that softened the lingering wounds of earlier heartbreaks. With her he found a version of home he had long searched for but rarely admitted he needed. There is a rare kind of love that does not announce itself loudly, but instead settles slowly, becoming the quiet foundation of a life. For Paul and Linda McCartney, that foundation was built not in studios or on stages but in the ordinary rhythms of family, breakfast shared before school, muddy boots left at the back door, children laughing across wide-open fields. When they married in 1969, they did more than merge their careers. They created a blended family that reshaped them both. Heather, Linda's daughter from her first marriage, was welcomed into Paul's life with an openness rarely seen in the world of fame. Soon after came Mary in 1969, Stella in 1971, and James in 1977. Together they formed a household that defied the expectations placed on a global icon. Instead of raising their children under bright lights, Paul and Linda sought something gentler, something far from the noise that had once defined his world. Their farm in Kintyre became the heart of this new chapter. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't polished, but it was real. Days were filled with chores, long walks, simple meals, and a level of freedom that children of a Beatle were never expected to have. Paul often spoke about how life on the farm allowed him to reclaim parts of himself he had lost during the most intense years of the Beatles' fame. In the stillness of wide Scottish mornings, he rediscovered balance, and in the grounding presence of Linda, he found a partner who understood the value of privacy, normalcy, and raising children away from the weight of constant expectation. But the McCartney story was never limited to quiet domesticity. As Paul began shaping his post-Beatles musical life, he invited Linda into a world she had never imagined entering. She had no musical training, no formal preparation for what lay ahead. Yet when he asked her to join Wings, she said yes, not out of ambition, but out of devotion. It was an act of courage that became one of the defining threads of their shared journey. She learned openly, performed bravely, and stood beside Paul not as an ornament, but as a genuine creative partner. Their work together was sometimes challenged by critics, but their unity never wavered. To them, the band was not a career move. It was an extension of their family, an opportunity to be together in every season of their lives. The nearly 3 decades that followed became one of the longest-running partnerships in modern music. They traveled together, created together, parented together, and met the world side by side. It was a life shaped by constant motion, yet always grounded by their devotion to one another and to the children they raised. At every turn, Paul spoke with openness about how deeply Linda influenced him, not just in his music, but in the way he approached fatherhood. She encouraged him to slow down, to listen, to be present. Under her steady guidance, he embraced a gentler rhythm, one built on patience, wonder, and the belief that the greatest work a person can do is within the walls of their own home. Looking back on these years, a simple truth emerges. Stability became Paul's greatest treasure. In the warmth of their family, in the courage Linda showed by stepping into a world she had never trained for, and in the unity they carried through every storm, Paul found the enduring gift he had long sought, a life anchored by love, devotion, and the quiet strength of a partner who believed in him completely. In 1998, Paul McCartney faced a heartbreak that no music, no stage, and no audience could soften. Linda, his wife of nearly 3 decades, his creative partner and the anchor of his life, was diagnosed with breast cancer. At just 56, she passed away, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the rhythm of his days. Paul has shared that for a year he cried every single day, each tear a reminder that the woman who had steadied him, who had transformed the chaos of fame into a life of love and purpose, was gone. The world saw a Beatle, a living legend, but privately, he was a man unmoored, grappling with the enormity of absence and the loneliness of having spent decades as one half of a team now reduced to a solitary figure. The aftermath of Linda's death left Paul navigating life in uncharted territory. The structure, routine, and quiet joy she had provided vanished, replaced by an emptiness that fame could not fill. For the first time, he experienced the deep ache of living without his partner, without the rhythm they had built together, without the grounding presence that had shaped every choice he had made. Even amidst his work and tours, the absence was palpable. a constant gentle echo reminding him that life would never feel complete in the same way again. Seeking connection, Paul entered a new chapter in 1999, beginning a relationship with Heather Mills, a former model with her own history of adversity. Their courtship led to marriage in 2002, only a few years after Linda's passing. Unlike the quiet partnership he had shared with Linda, this marriage unfolded under intense public scrutiny, magnified by the media's fascination with fame and wealth. From the start, their union was fraught with tension. Paul's children struggled with the relationship, unsettled by the presence of someone so different from the mother they had lost. The public watched as private disagreements became tabloid stories, and the couple's life together seemed less like a partnership and more like a spectacle. After 6 years of turbulence, their marriage ended in divorce in 2008. The settlement was significant, the headlines relentless, and Paul later described this period as the lowest point of his life. In the shadow of personal and familial upheaval, he was forced to confront grief anew, not only for the loss of Linda, but for the ways in which the years following had unsettled his children and tested his resilience. The world outside saw wealth and success, but inside he faced questions of love, loyalty, and the consequences of human imperfection. From this devastation, however, Paul began to rebuild. He returned to music with renewed purpose, finding solace in sound, creation, and collaboration. He formed new projects, including The Fireman, and found ways to channel sorrow into artistic energy. More importantly, he sought to repair and strengthen the bonds with his children, recognizing the depth of pain they had endured, and the role he could play in guiding them toward healing. Through patience, presence, and care, he reconstructed a sense of family, one not defined solely by tragedy, but by shared love, memory, and commitment. With time, the heart learns to move again, slowly, cautiously, but with the quiet hope that life might still offer peace. For Paul McCartney, that peace arrived not in the glare of cameras, but in the gentle, steady presence of Nancy Shevell. They had crossed paths years before, long before romance was possible, but it was only in the years following the turbulence of his divorce that their connection found its natural place. By the time they married in 2011, they were both older, wiser, and searching for a kind of partnership shaped not by spectacle but by shared respect and a desire for calm. Their union remained private, reflective of two people who understood life's fragility and valued the quiet moments over the grand gestures. With Nancy, Paul found stability once more, a steady rhythm that came without chaos or noise. Yet, even as his new marriage settled into something warm and grounding, Paul never shied away from acknowledging the place Linda held in his life. Approaching his 80th birthday, he spoke openly about her influence, her spirit, and the love that had shaped him in ways no one else ever could. He described her not just as a partner, but as the person who understood him most deeply, the one who recognized the man beneath the fame, who anchored him when the world spun too fast, and who believed in him even in the smallest, quietest ways. She had given him a home not defined by walls, but by presence, a life shaped not by fame, but by family. Time softened nothing about her loss. Instead, it illuminated the truth that grief had always carried. Linda was the love who defined the man he became. Paul reflected with candor on the years after her passing, the choices made in sorrow, and the unexpected harm that rippled into the lives of his children. He spoke of regret, gentle, honest regret, for the pain they endured as they navigated their own grief while watching him struggle. It was the kind of regret that comes not from shame but from growth, the understanding that love, even when imperfect, continues to teach long after the story has changed. In recent years, Paul has kept Linda's spirit close through the work he knows best, music. During the lockdown period, he returned to the studio with a renewed sense of purpose, collaborating with his son James on new songs that bridged past and present. These sessions were intimate, stripped of the machinery that often surrounds his work, giving him space to reflect, create, and feel her presence in the quiet between notes. The music became a vessel for memory, proof that love can outlive even the hardest chapters, shaping the art that remains. With Nancy by his side and his children grown into their own remarkable lives, Paul entered his 80s with a gentle clarity. Every chapter mattered. The innocence of young love, the courage of adulthood, the devastation of loss, and the renewal of healing, all of it formed the legacy he now carries. The wisdom of age taught him that love does not diminish when life changes. It expands, deepens, and leaves echoes that continue guiding each step forward. At 81, Paul McCartney speaks with a softness that only time can shape. The decades have given him distance, but not detachment. Instead, they have offered clarity, a gentle understanding of what Linda truly meant to his life. Her presence still lingers in the choices he makes, in the patience he shows as a father, and in the quiet gratitude that settles over his later years. Her touch remains in the melodies he continues to write, in the compassion he carries, and in the memories that return with startling tenderness. Looking back, Paul realizes that love does not fade simply because life changes. It becomes part of the fabric of who you are, guiding you long after footsteps fall silent. Linda's influence is woven into every chapter that followed, a reminder of the home she built within him. Time has not erased her, it has made her meaning unmistakable. And so his confession is not born of longing but of truth. She was the love who understood him most deeply, the partner whose spirit still steadies him. For more emotional stories, check out this video.